My name is Carlin Borisenko, and you're listening to the Actively Unwoke Podcast. You can find full archives of the podcast over on my Substack, Carlin, Karlyn.substack.com. And if you appreciate the work I'm doing, if you appreciate the podcast, I hope you'll consider signing up for a membership. $8 a month, $80 a year. I am completely grassroots funded by you guys, so your donations help support the work I'm doing. It does give you access to a variety of perks, and you will find those perks every Sunday in the Unwoke Roundup newsletter that I send out on the Substack. All right. There's so much to talk about with regards to the college protests, and I've been doing ongoing coverage of this on my Twitter. I'm at Dr. Carlin B, on my YouTube and Rumble channels, and my daily streams on the Substack, although it has kind of started to slow down because the college protests are winding down, at least for the moment. Now, make no mistake, they're not over. This is not over, but a lot of colleges have just had graduation. Kids are going home. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that we are going to have another summer of love. And remember, they're all going back to school in the fall. And if this stuff in Israel isn't wrapped up by then we're probably going to see another round of protests because they've found their issue with this one. We all thought last year before October 7th that the trans issue, that they were going to have some sort of trans Floyd moment. But no, it turned out it was Gaza Floyd instead. And, the big lesson with this, and well, actually there are many lessons, and we're going to get into some of those in this podcast. The big lesson with this is that the left will take on any issue that they need to in order to advance their ideology. Now, the Free Palestine movement has been a thing for a very, very, very long time. The Free Palestine movement is a real thing, and there are legitimately activists within the movement that care about the Free Palestine issue, that have always cared about it, that have been fighting for that particular revolution for decades. That's all real. However, we also know, and I have Angela Davis on video saying this, I think, a week or two after October 7th, this was a very quick statement from her. It was in a webinar by Haymarket Books, which of course is our favorite socialist book publisher, and they've done all sorts of streams about all of the stuff that's going on in Israel and Palestine. And Angela Davis was on one of those webinars, and she said that the far left, the social justice left, co-opted the Free Palestine movement. And they absorbed the Free Palestine movement. So what people need to understand is that, well, there are legitimate Free Palestine activists that have always been involved in this movement, that is their one issue that they care about. The majority of the left in the United States doesn't really care. Okay, they might care a little bit. I'm not saying they're completely ambivalent to the Palestinian cause, but what I am suggesting is it's not their main cause. It's not their number one cause. Now, it will become their number one cause when it is convenient for that to happen. It will become their number one cause when they can continue to advance their own ideology as a result of that. That's all true. But the vast majority of protesters that you see, whether they're college students or not, and that's something we're going to talk about, they're using the issue to advance the ideology. Intifada is not anti-Semitic. Intifada does not mean kill all the Jews. Intifada means worldwide socialist revolution. And I know that because I had two members of the Revolutionary Communists of America on my YouTube channel, probably about a month ago as of this recording. You can find this video on my Substack. And they literally said, Intifada means worldwide socialist revolution. And so a lot of the media is getting this wrong. They're saying that anyone who's saying Intifada is anti-Semitic and they're calling for the annihilation of the Jews. No, that's not what they're calling for. They're calling for the worldwide socialist revolution. That is what the far left means by that word in this country. And guess what, guys? You can say, that's not the right definition, but it doesn't matter. Because you don't set the definition any more than they do. The words that people use have the meanings that the groups assign to them. And the meaning that you assign to that word, in this case, usually anti-Semitism if we're talking about conservatives, maybe not you personally, anyone who's listening to this podcast, but I'm saying people on the right, people who are saying that Intifada is anti-Semitic. That is your assigned definition. The assigned definition that the left has, that the college protesters have, that all of the agitators have, is worldwide socialist revolution. Same vocabulary, different dictionary. And if you think it's anti-Semitic, you're allowed to think that, I guess, but you are not the blessed dictator of all of the definitions of words. You don't get to make that decision for everyone else. And saying, that's not what the word means, it doesn't mean worldwide socialist revolution, it means this other thing over here. Saying that is not going to change anything about what the left is doing. It wins you no victories. It scores you no points. It doesn't beat back the Cultural Revolution at all. In fact, it probably does more to advance the worldwide socialist revolution than it does to detract from it, because you're ignoring the reality of what the left is doing and where their energy is focused. And you're just saying, if I just debunk you, then I'm going to win. Has debunking ever won anything? The answer to that is no. Debunking language, saying your definition is better than their definition and they have to use your definition, that has never won a single fight against the left. It has never won a single battle. So why do we continue to do it? Our goal here should be to understand them and what they are doing and how they perceive the world. That is the only way to defeat your enemy, is to understand them. People have always known this. You can read this in Sun Tzu's Art of War. You can even find it in sci-fi books like Ender's Game. Ender's Game is my favorite book, and in Ender's Game, he talks about the moment that he loves his enemy is also the moment he has to destroy them. Well, what do you have to do in order to love your enemy? You have to understand them. You have to be able to put yourself in their shoes and connect with them on that deep level where you understand them. You see them for what they are. That is the only way we win. And if people keep digging in their heels and saying, my definition of words is the only one that matters, and I say it's anti-Semitic, because you're trying to sell an anti-Semitism narrative. And let's just be very clear about this, guys. The anti-Semitism narrative is a narrative. Most people who would consider themselves pro-Palestine do not care if people are Jewish. They are not opposed to Jewish people. They do not want to annihilate Jewish people. They don't care, because that's not the issue to them. The issue is about Israel being settler colonists. That's going to be synonymous with capitalist, bourgeois, private property owners, because what they perceive is that Israel, the settler colonists, have privatized the property in Gaza and the West Bank for that matter, and they privatized it under the oppressive force of capitalism. What the Palestinians are doing is the glorious revolution, and I'm putting my fist in my hair in the air. There we go. Fist in the air like the Black Lives Matter fist right now. What they perceive the Palestinians to be doing is the glorious revolution against capitalism, against the bourgeois, against the oppressor, against the settler colonists. That's why Intifada means worldwide socialist revolution. It does not mean annihilate all the Jews, because they don't care if people are Jewish. In fact, there have been Jewish students involved in the encampments. The anti-Semitism narrative is just a narrative to rile people up and to get money. That's all it is. It's about money. Anyway, I suppose that's thing one you need to understand about the college protests. Thing two is this. These are highly organized groups, because the college encampments didn't just spring up out of nowhere. You know, I got into a conversation with the QAnon shaman on Twitter the other day, Jacob Chansley, and I actually like the QAnon shaman. Believe it or not, if you've never listened to the QAnon shaman, he is actually a really interesting guy with a really interesting perspective, and I like him an awful lot, but he's wrong about this. And he said, who's funding these people? And I said, they're self-funded. Now, a lot of people on the conservative right seem to think that they're funded by George Soros because they think George Soros funds everything. And sure, I'm sure there are onesie and twosies in these groups that you can find someone within some organizing group that had a fellowship that was partially funded by George Soros, but that doesn't mean they're all funded by George Soros. And in fact, there were articles in the New York Post and Politico that they had headlines that said, they're all funded by George Soros. And then if you actually read the article, which no one did, if you actually read the article, there's no receipts to back that up. Literally, there's no receipts to back up that headline in the article. But most people don't read the articles. They just read the headlines, and it says the thing they want them to say, which is, they're funded by George Soros, which is not true. These groups are usually almost entirely self-funded. They are funded through dues. Some groups have their members pay 1 day's wages a month in dues to be in the organization. They're funded by donations. They're funded by event ticket sales. They might do trainings or, parties or things like that. And they're funded by publishing. They charge for all of their materials, even a pamphlet. Even if you go to a socialist event and you're, walking up and down the exhibitor tables, if you want to take a pamphlet, oftentimes they're not free. You have to pay them like $1 or $2, something like that, just for a pamphlet. And so they charge for everything. And this is how they are able to have money to do stuff. Now, a lot of these organizations operate on a shoestring budget. That people are making a big I saw someone lying on Twitter saying, the tents were $500 each that the Columbia protests were using. No, they weren't. They were like $30 on Amazon. And these are things that are easily provable. Anyway, I was in this conversation with the QAnon shaman. He said, who's funding these people? And I said, they're self-funded, and which is true. And he replied to me, no, it's impossible for them to be self-funded. It all came together too quickly. They just sprung up out of nowhere. And I was incredulous because he's a really smart guy, but he's been lied to by people, because the reality is that the groups on the college campuses did not spring up from nowhere. In fact, they've been organizing on this issue for months. The groups on the college campuses that are starting the encampments, running the encampments, literally started protesting right after October 7th. And they were just holding protests. They were holding rallies. They were holding vigils. All this stuff was covered on the news. This is what Bill Ackman jumped into when he rented a truck that had the names of all the Harvard students that he wanted to try to blackball on Wall Street because they were participating in these protests. They were doing die-ins in, what is the main train station in Philadelphia? I forget the main train station, but there's a big old scene where all these socialists went into that main train station in Philadelphia and they all just laid down on the floor and were dying. They did that. They had massive marches in Washington, D.C. All of these were the same groups that were coordinating all this stuff. They were literally organizing on this issue for months and months and months, and people forget this for some reason. And they got so much pushback by the media, and everyone was calling them anti-Semitic, that it actually made the number of protesters start to balloon. And they just kept going and going and going. And the more the media tried to slam them, the more they kept going. And so the college encampments that you saw and all the things happening at the graduations and things like that, that didn't just spring up out of nowhere. That was building for 6 months prior to the encampments actually starting. But it even goes back further than that, because most of those groups on colleges and most of the outside agitators that came in, they're constantly organizing. So we're talking about groups that have literally been organizing together for years. They were organizing together for years before October 7th. The group that started the protests at Columbia University Apartheid Divest, that group, it's actually a coalition of 100 different groups on campus. It had been around for years. They had been making these same demands for years. So this idea that this is so highly organized that it must be funded by George Soros, that's simply not true. It did not spring up from nowhere. These people have known each other for years. They're friends. They do this all the time. This is how they bond as a group. They organize. They literally take pride in being an organizer. An organizer in the far left is someone who has status. It's kind of like being a manager or a director. You're not at the upper levels yet, but being an organizer and being a successful organizer is how you kind of move up the ranks on the far left to get towards the inner party. So this didn't come from nowhere. It comes from somewhere. This is the type of stuff I cover on my YouTube channel all the time. This is why I monitor these groups on my Substack. I haven't talked a lot about them on the podcast because I haven't been doing as many podcasts, but that'll change now because people want them. And people really need to start hinging into reality on this, because a lot of people think that just because something isn't reported on the news, that means it's not happening. This stuff is happening all the time, and it's happening around us every day. The last thing I want to talk about on this, and again, there's so many other things to talk about, but these are the 3 things that are top of mind for me at the moment, is one of the kind of owns that the conservatives are trying to do on the college protesters is this idea of, they're not all college students. This is one of the dumbest arguments that the right has ever made, by the way. They're not all college students, so they must all be George Soros funded and they must all be professional protesters. As I just said, this is what the left does all the time. This is what they rally around. And the right doesn't understand this. The right does not understand the constant activism. The right didn't understand the long march through the institutions was something that happened as a battle of inches over the course of years with small, tiny, minuscule advances taking place every day because the left never stops fighting. The left never goes to sleep. The left wakes up every single day and just to get a sliver of an inch further than they were before. And so they never stop organizing. So saying that the students on college campuses the protesters on college campuses aren't just college students, so what? That just means they're being mentored by people who are far more experienced than them. That actually makes the problem worse. To say they aren't just college students, there are all these other people involved too, that actually makes the problem worse. That's not a good thing. That means the left is winning, and that means the left is winning even more than you probably thought before. And guess what? The left is fully aware of this argument. And I know that because I happen to have some literature from the encampment at the University of Michigan. I happen to have, actually, many community members of mine live in Michigan, and one of them went and walked through the encampment at the University of Michigan, and I said, can you get all their literature and scan it for me and send it to me? And she said, yes, I can. And so you will find this in the show notes over on the Substack. I'm also going to do a separate article that allows everyone to download all the literature because there's a bunch of literature that she got me. It's really kind of like a treasure trove. But there is one thing specifically in one of the pieces of literature that I want to read to you. And this piece of literature is called Flood the Gates, Escalate, an intervention by Palestine Action US. And this is basically a pamphlet about how to continue to escalate what's going on with the college protests, and they have like 5 tips, and I'm not going to read all the tips, but I'm going to read number 3, which is pertinent to this issue. This is what the left is telling their people. While the right is saying, oh, those protests, most of them aren't even college students. We don't need to worry about it. They're just professional agitators, and we don't need to worry about it. And, it's just like most of them aren't even students. They don't even know what they're protesting. That's nonsense too, by the way. They do know what they're protesting. They have literal list of demands. They have demands. You don't have a list of demands if you don't know what you're protesting, okay? Like, that's just common sense. Anyway, back to this idea that it's a bad thing that the protests are not just college students. Here is what this pamphlet says. Tip number 3, break open the university gates. To those holding down campus occupations, your first task is to open the campus to the community and reject the distinction between students and outside agitators. The popular movement for Palestine is currently based out of the universities, but students are not the sole leaders, and non-students possess a reservoir of knowledge and experience to expand the struggle beyond the campus. We must create our own popular cradle of resistance. The most effective occupations have been where students have strong alliances with non-students and where they connect the struggle to free Palestine with the struggle against U.S. fascism and cop cities everywhere. Fascism, by the way, is defined as free market capitalism by socialists. Fascism means anything that's not socialist. It means capitalism. It means private property ownership. So if you want to play this game of owning the libs by saying, those protests, most of them aren't even college students, and then roll your eyes and then go home and pretend nothing is happening and pretend that this is all just going to blow over and they're going to go and get a job and then they're going to forget about this. The people running the protests are saying to you, we don't think it's a bad thing that there are outside agitators. In fact, those outside agitators have a wealth of resources, a wealth of information, a wealth of experience that the students can learn from. And guess what? If we can get the students working with the non-students, we can leave the college campuses. This is going to come out into the world. Listen, when they were contained on college campuses, that was actually better for the rest of us. When they were contained on college campuses, they were isolated to the university, and I have no problem if they pull down the university structure, which is actually their goal. We'll talk about that another time. They believe that the universities have capitulated to capitalism and are just trying to train workers to feed the capitalist system. And so the college student protesters, one of their implied goals based on their ideology is that they do want to tear down the university. An organizer at Columbia is literally on video, I have it on my channel, calling Columbia an illegitimate university. While they were on college campuses, they were contained. They had their enemy, that was the college. And now you're telling me that they're literally saying, you know what, these non-student agitators, we can work with them to bleed the protests into the real world. They just went from being the problem of the colleges to everyone's problem. Do you see that? Saying most of those protesters aren't even students anyway. You're telling us the problem is going to get bigger and it's going to affect everyone that's not on a college campus. Because what the students are saying is we must create our own popular cradle of resistance. The most effective occupations have been where students have strong alliances with non-students and where they can connect the struggle to free Palestine with the struggle against U.S. fascism in cop cities everywhere. They're literally saying the popular movement for Palestine is currently based out of universities, but students are not the sole leaders, and non-students possess a reservoir of knowledge and experience to expand the struggle beyond the campus. I don't know why the right doesn't think through their talking points anymore. It's kind of like they aren't even trying. Every single talking point I've seen coming out of the right about this has just been false. Has been either false or it's a factually true statement that students are not the only ones in the college protests, but it's like, draw that out to its logical end conclusion. Do you think that that's a good thing or a bad thing? Do you think that it's a good thing so far as the students are concerned? The students love this. The students who took over that building at Columbia, they had people training them on how to take over that building. They had experienced activists training them on direct action. That's what they call it, direct action. And here's the right going, we can dismiss them because most of them, they're not even students anyway. It's like, bro, are you even thinking about the implications of what you're saying? If most of them aren't students, that means that eventually this is going to leave the college campuses, and we're already seeing that in places. We're seeing that in New York. They're marching all around New York all the time. We're going to see it in Los Angeles. I guarantee you we're going to see it there. Now that graduation week is kind of like over and they're kind of getting acclimated, they're going to start protesting and it's going to go into the streets. So it was in which is a bigger problem? If it's in UCLA's quad or if they're marching down Hollywood Boulevard, like which is actually a bigger problem? I mean, and just wait until the Democratic convention in Chicago, because there are already groups that want to recreate what happened in Chicago in 1968 with the last time the Democrats had their convention there. There are already groups and this is actually not even a recent thing. There have been these groups for a while. They're organizing to massively protest in Chicago around the DNC. I wonder how that's going to go for the city of Chicago, but the city of Chicago is also pretty socialist, so do we really care if they tear it down? I mean, it's sad. The city of Chicago is a beautiful city and they've got great hot dogs, but they are indeed already lost to the socialists, so I suppose it's not one of the things that we really can control, is it? Anyway, I hope I've given you some things to think about. I know for some people listening to this podcast, I'm telling you that your heroes are lying to you. I'm telling you that your influencers are lying to you. I'm telling you that the media is lying to you, and those aren't going to be things you want to hear, especially if you're maybe newer to my work and you haven't been exposed to this before, just how badly both sides lie to their communities to get them all riled up and get them angry. But we need to start hinging back into reality, I guess, is my main point. And the way you hinge back into reality is that you look at the primary source information and you assess it for what it is. And you try to take emotion out of it as much as possible. And you just look at what's happening. I don't consider myself to be on the same side as the protesters, even though I am actually sympathetic to them on this issue. But the reason I don't consider myself to be on the same side is because I'm not a socialist, and I don't want a socialist. I don't want an Intifada. I don't want a socialist revolution. I don't want that. And so even though I am anti-war and anti-genocide, and I'm very opposed to what Israel is doing in Palestine, and I know many people are, I don't consider myself to be on their side, but I still have to look at their material with an objective mind to say, what are they doing? What are they thinking? How can we get to know them a little bit better so that we can kind of get in front of it maybe instead of always being on the back foot? And if you don't understand your enemy, you cannot defeat them. And the political lines and the lies and the narratives and the antisemitism, I'm going to have to write a new introduction to my book. For those of you who never read my book, Actively Unwoke, The Ultimate Guide for Fighting Back Against the Woke Insanity in Your Life, you can get it on Amazon if you feel so inclined. But the introduction to that book is, you are not a racist. And it says over and over and over again, you are not a racist. And it talks about some of the ways the left has defined things as racism that it's stupid to call them racist. And there's a whole long list in the book. And the whole point of the chapter is you have to inoculate yourself to getting called names. But I'm really considering, do I need to rewrite that chapter to be, you are not an anti-Semite? Because now the political right is throwing around the term anti-Semite to apply to everyone who disagrees with them. And it's like, that's not productive. It's just not productive. First of all, you're taking on the strategies of the left, and that's retarded. I'm sorry if that word offends anyone, but that's retarded. You're acting no different than the left. You're literally doing what they did with the term racist, with the term transphobic. You're doing it with the term anti-Semite. We have to inoculate ourselves to that word because it is not hinged into reality of why the protests are happening. And if the right wants to take everyone on this tangent, and basically they're being like the Pied Piper that are playing everyone right off a cliff, they're going to lose to the left. The left is going to win. And we're going to get another 4 years of Democratic rule in the government come November. I really do believe that. I really do believe that if the right doesn't get its act together and start reining things in and start hinging into reality and stop calling everyone an anti-Semite who doesn't agree with them, then the Democrats are going to win in November. Do you want that? Or do you want to keep dicking around owning the libs to advance a narrative? I guess the choice is yours. That's all I have for right now. If you have questions about anything I said in this podcast, please head over to karlyn.substack.com. You can leave them in the comments. I will do my very best to answer them. And again, if you appreciate my work, please sign up as a supporter. For $8 a month, $80 a year, you will get access to a variety of perks, including my supporter-only podcast, The Inner Circle, including access to 2 weekly Zoom calls with me, including access to my supporter Discord, including a 10% off discount in the Unwoke Art merch store, including access to Spy Stream, all sorts of good stuff that we got going on over on the Substack. And of course, I can't do it without you guys. You completely fund me. And so, Karlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. I'll make sure the link is in the show notes. I really do appreciate the support, guys. I'll be back again soon.